Welcome to today's debates between SPKC College and Wong College. As attorney and chairperson, and Hey will be the timekeeper. The adjudicator is Mr. Brian Lam from the Hong Kong University debating team. Today's motion is that ASEAN should sanction its member nations for environmental disaster which have international effects. For the affirmative team, the first speaker is Rachel. The second speaker is Hermes. The third speaker is Alice. For the negative, the first speaker is Addison. Second speaker is Marcos. And the third speaker is Wong. The rules of the debate are as follows. Each speaker will have a total of 3 minutes and 15 seconds to speak. There will be one bell at 2 minutes 2 bells at 3 minutes, and continuous raining at 3 minutes 15. One speaker must finish. So let's start the debate. I will now call on the first speaker of the affirmative.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Our teams strongly support the motion because we believe that sanction is the best and only resort to minimize the negative effects on these countries. I'll first talk about why we need sanctions and why ASEAN is the best agent to implement them. My second speaker will lay out the model of sanctioning according to the scale of disasters. The third speaker will summarize the case. Before I begin my case, I'll give out some definitions. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, was established on 8th of August 1967. The 10 member states are Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Brunei, Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar, and Cambodia. We define sanction as an action that is taken or an order that is given to force a country to obey international laws by limiting or stopping trade with that country, or not allowing economic aid for that country, etc., according to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. Environmental disaster, according to the Earth Times, are events caused by human activity that results in a serious, likely negative effect. Today, at this debate, we will prove you that ASEAN has to sanction its member according to the scale of effects, because it's the most effective way to minimize and to deter negative impacts. For the opponents to win this debate, they need to show that there are better ways other than sanctions to solve these critical problems. The deadly Indonesia haze is a huge disaster in Southeast Asia. It has affected the people's health and the economy. In 1997 to 1998, the haze caused US $9 billion and 2.5 million tons of carbon dioxide were pumped into the atmosphere, according to the ASEAN Secretariat. All this because Indonesia allowed the use of fire for deforestation. Malaysia, Singapore, many Southeast Asia countries have tried to persuade Indonesia to take action. They signed an ASEAN agreement on transboundary haze pollution on 10th of June 2002. But just recently, 25th September 2015, smoke from Indonesia haze has again forced Singapore to shut down schools and curb outdoor activities. So clearly, sanctions need to be imposed. Sanctioning is the only solution, and ASEAN is the best agent because the member nations of ASEAN, including the 10 countries, are near to each other and have a close relationship with each other. For example, Singapore and Malaysia have bilateral trade totaling roughly $91 billion in 2012. Last year, between Cambodia and Indonesia was $220 million, 10% rise compared to the previous year. Thus, ASEAN is the best vehicle to solve the problem in a fair and peaceful manner. Ladies and gentlemen, sanctioning is the best and only resort to minimize the negative effects on these countries. We are sure that today's motion must stand.
The speaker has used 3 minutes and 10 seconds.
I'll now call on the first speaker of the opposition.
You said ASEAN should impose sanctions on its member nation for environmental disasters. But according to a respected economist from Virginia, Ernest Henry Krieg, said sanctions do not work the majority of the time. And according to French political scientist Chantal de Jong, economic sanctions are ineffective because ASEAN's member nations are not mutually dependent on another. The opposition has given an unclear definition of sanctions. According to U.S. Security Department, sanctions are rules imposed on another country. They are negative actions providing restrictions. The opposition's example of sanctions are too positive. This is an important distinction because we must know clearly and accurately what sanction is. First and foremost, the issue is ASEAN is unique. They are neither in a position to impose sanctions nor is obligated to do so. Our team line today is not feasible, not ethical, not possible. I will be giving an overview of our arguments. Our second speaker will give specific case and examples proving my point. Our third speaker will conclude today's debate. We will discuss ethics by looking at ASEAN's charter and its public statement. We are going to show you that their charter and its principles make it contradictory for ASEAN to impose sanctions. Before we talk about feasibility of ASEAN imposing sanctions, we should first go back in time and review the charter, the basic principle that lined out the formation of ASEAN. Looking at the charter, we can understand the principle that ASEAN tries to uphold. We know by its own admission that it's not ethical for ASEAN to impose sanctions on its own nations. Not ethical, not feasible, not possible. ASEAN's charter re-emphasizes respect. Respect for territorial integrity, sovereignty, non-interference, preservation for national identity. It then continued by promising to promote dialogue and conciliation. Sanctions do not respect territorial integrity. Sanctions do not promote dialogues. The takeaway point is that there are many clauses in the charter that imposes sanction. That is not ethical. Therefore, today's motion must fall. Thank you.
Speaker has used 2 minutes and 15 seconds. 50 seconds.
I'll now call on the second speaker of the affirmative team.
Imagine, one day you wake up and you can barely see across the road. Children are not allowed to go to school or play outside. Businesses are all closed because of the heavy smog that created by a neighboring country. And even your government can't help you. How would you feel? Ladies and gentlemen, this is the exact situation that Singaporeans and Malaysians have been living for so many years. We strongly support the motion because we believe that it's the best and the only resort to minimize the negative effect on this country. My first speaker has already shown you that why we need sanctions and why ASEAN is the best agent to implement it. I'm going to lay out the model of sanctioning according to the scale of disaster. Before I begin my speech, there are some problems that we need to fix. They said that the sanctions should not be done by ASEAN, but as my first speaker has mentioned, ASEAN has a close relationship among those countries, and so it is more effective than sanctioning by other countries, and ASEAN has the right and they should intervene. They also said that ASEAN member nations don't have economic relationship between each other, but according to my second speaker has said that the latest figure of Cambodia's Ministry of Commerce, the bilateral trade volume last year between Cambodia and Indonesia was $220 million. So now, back to the business. Our opponent said that we don't have a clear definition of sanctioning. Now, I'm going to give you the definition. We're not suggesting sanctioning under all circumstances. We take sanctioning as the only resort when other ways such as diplomatic persuasion, public appeals, and agreements failed to convince the government to change a policy. And my first speaker has already shown you the example of Indonesia case. When we're sanctioning, when 1. Actions of country do affect the safety of citizens or other countries. 2. Having an international effect. 3. And if the countries fail to solve these issues. For example, the burning forest in Indonesia brought a thick haze to Singapore, Malaysia, and itself. It's observably affecting the safety of citizens of many countries, and the Indonesian government are not doing enough. Something has to be done. There are 2 stages of sanctions. First, non-economic sanctions. Second, economic sanctions. At the first, if the negative effects are not prevalent, we can use non-economic sanctions. Cancelling ministerial and summit meetings, denying the target country's government officials visas to enter other countries, withdrawing other countries' ambassadors, blocking the target country from joining international organizations, opposing the target country to host highly visible international events such as Olympics, withholding foreign aid, and instructing other countries to vote against new laws. That is the first stage of the plan. And if the non-economic sanctions do not work, we move on to the second stage, economic sanctions. Economic sanctions include trade barriers and restricting of financial transactions, such as limiting exports or imports, restricting investment, prohibiting private financial transactions between anyone, including citizens or government. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've clearly shown you that sanctioning is the best and the only resort to minimize the negative effect on this country. We are proud to propose this motion. Thank you.
This speaker has used 3 minutes and 14 seconds.
I'll now call on the second speaker of negative.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. To elaborate on my first speaker's arguments about feasibility and ethics, I am going to give case studies that show how poorly equipped Asean is to sanction and prove that it is not feasible. These case studies will show that sanctions are not feasible, not ethical, not possible. The first case, we'll look at the environmental disaster that took place in Eastern Timor Sea, where an oil spill took place in the September of 2009. Asean did not impose any sanctions. According to Asian press release, ASEAN doesn't clean up because the charter dictates that it shouldn't interfere with other member countries. At last, Australia cleaned up all the entire oil spill. The second case studies will look at the peatland forest in Indonesia. That it is held by the media as a huge success in dealing with the environmental disasters. However, were the peatland conservation effort really a success? The peatland example is very relevant because it is an environmental disaster caused by human industry, primary farming, and the industry. Again, Asean choose not to sanction but to cooperate. They prove themselves to capable of actions of the day. The peatland sustainability conservation effort was primarily funded by the German government and European stockholders, not by Asean. We find it suspect to call the peatland Asian success when they were not the primary financing. Isn't it just like oil spill? They once again let other country clean it up. Would it have been equally successful if Asean didn't contribute? From the first case, we learned that Asean never imposed sanctions. This is because they believe they should not. According to its own charter, they have especially taken care to avoid sanctions. More importantly, the second case, ASEAN doesn't have the economic ability to do anything, let alone to impose sanctions. Even in its press release, it used words like urge and calls to avoid the economic obligation, like in the peatland forest example, and the oil spills. When we compare the both examples, we have given a convincing imposing sanctions are not feasible for Asia. If it can't be done, it shouldn't be done. After all, there is no other ethical obligation when nothing can't be done. This is why feasibility is so important. Thank you.
This speaker has used 3 minutes and 1 second.
And now call on the third speaker of the affirmative.
Ladies and gentlemen, based on the case of the Indonesia haze, it is very clear that signing agreements and persuasion are totally ineffective. People have been living in the haze for 20 years and nothing has been done. Therefore, sanctioning is the best way to go. Ladies and gentlemen, our team strongly support the motion because we believe that sanctioning is the best and only resort to minimize the negative effects on those countries. However, our opponents have tried to mislead us again and again by saying that. The first speaker of the negative mentioned that the example of sanctions are too positive and it do not respect each other and economic sanctions are negative. However, do you have better ways other than sanctions give out the benefits that sanctioning brings? Sanctioning is the best and only way to minimize the negative effect of those countries. Moreover, as my second speaker has mentioned that, there are also non-economic sanctions which bring positive effects. Our opponents has also mentioned that ASEAN do not impose sanctions. However, their effect has already reached the international level, and based on this reason, something has to be done. Therefore, sanctioning is the best way. And our first speaker has also mentioned that for the opponents to win this debate, they need to prove that there are better ways other than sanctions to solve this critical problem. However, our opponents have failed to prove it, so therefore, sanctioning is the only and best way to go. Back to our contention. Ladies and gentlemen, sanctioning is the most effective way to minimize and to deter negative impacts. My first speaker has already shown you the example of the Indonesia case where persuasion and signing agreements were not useful at all. So, it is very clear that sanctions need to be imposed. Sanctioning is the best and only way to go. My first speaker has also shown you that ASEAN is the best agent because it has a close relationship and better understanding among those countries. Moreover, ASEAN are the quickest and most effective deterrent for its member nations. They could also avoid direct conflict because ASEAN, as a medium, could solve the problems in a fair and peaceful manner. My second speaker has already laid out the model of sanctioning according to the scale of the disasters. We are not sanctioning under all circumstances. We only sanction when it is urgent and other methods have failed to convince the government to change a policy. There are two stages of sanctioning. When the negative effects are not prevalent, we use non-economic sanctions, such as cancelling ministerial and summit meetings, withdrawing other countries' ambassador. If non-economic sanctions are not useful, we'll move to the second stage, economic sanctions, which include trade barriers and restricting on financial transactions. Ladies and gentlemen, we have clearly shown you that sanctioning is the best and only resort to minimize the negative effects on those countries. Therefore, today's motion must stand. Thank you.
This speaker has used 2 minutes and 59 seconds.
And now call on the third speaker of negative.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Imagine there's a fire in a building. ASEAN is just a young man, and there's no fireman in sight. However, a person is dying in the building. What do? Our opposition suggests that ASEAN, the young man, should save that person by talking about, haze affects people's health and economy, and ASEAN should take action and put sanctions. It can minimize environmental disasters. However, the young man, in this case, is unequipped, which was explained by our second speaker, that they don't have the money to. They are untrained because ASEAN has never imposed sanctions before. And the chance of him and the person actually surviving the fire is extremely low, which means that the chance of the sanction actually succeeding is very low as well. So, should he go in at all? Or just focus on doing his job as written by his charter, which was clearly explained by our first speaker. Now, let's compare and contrast our arguments with our dear opponents. The first speaker has talked about data and numbers. They say that it's the best way. They say that ASEAN should sanction the nations to prevent environmental disasters or to minimize environmental disasters. However, non-interference is of vital importance to ASEAN. This principle, clearly explained by our first speaker, has for the most part remained unchanged from 1970s Treaty of Amity to the current charter. Now, did they define ASEAN the same way? They define ASEAN as the firemen in this case, but we define it as the policemen. They are not in the position to do so, to put sanctions. The opposition has mentioned about economic sanctions. However, does ASEAN actually have the power and the capability to impose such sanctions? Can ASEAN afford it? Can they afford that financial responsibility? As our second speaker has clearly explained the cases about the peeling and the oil spill. Was it ASEAN who took the responsibility? So, what do we need for ASEAN to feasibly and ethically impose sanctions on member nations? First, a new charter that actually has a plan for environmental issues. Second, more power to impose and enforce sanctions. Perhaps at the very least, economic influence over the government. The opposition states that there should be economic sanctions on countries, and it's also the best way. It can minimize the environmental disasters. However, this is not possible, not feasible, and not ethical. It will harm the poorest nations the most. ASEAN does not have that influence to put the sanctions. ASEAN has never imposed sanctions before, and it didn't work for UN or NA or NATO as well. So, until ASEAN has all these things to impose sanctions on its member nations, these sanctions are not feasible, not ethical, and not possible. Therefore, the motion must fall. Thank you.
This speaker has used 3 minutes and 16 seconds.
So that concludes today's debate. Please show your appreciation to both teams. There will be now a short break while the adjudicator comes to his judgment. It's pretty healthy, like exercise. Exercise is pretty big. They're all concrete. There are deep, and I want to take cedar debates. Yeah. But I went on a skate here, so I'm back. Yeah, we're in a same county now.
Much tougher.
Yeah, so stressed. Like, everything happened in a blink of an eye. And then when you watch it, you feel like, oh, it happens in like 5 minutes. And then the interrogative part is so fast, you can not even think of the answer. And it actually is stressful. One day is finished, you just take away your yeah, I know.
There's 3 of us, there's only 2 of us going this. It's not an easy job, I guess that's what.
I know, you can see that.
These guys home run. Can you believe that?
Oh, really?
Hey, it's adorable.
Why do you guys enjoy debating? Wow.
We don't do
It's a fairly small team. And even though we're able to stretch it out to 2, it's like 4 in the senior team and 4 in the junior team. Private engineer.
I'm not judging.
Everyone nearly over like but then in the beginning when I was still in uni,
They still give you 3 rounds.
Wong. For like university, I think when I was in university, so 3 years ago, our junior team won the first runner-up, and the senior team got the champ. And that was like our very glorious top. Yeah, this is closure to the
You meditate.
Why? What is and full of scandals. Sorry, just kidding.
People call me Yuki at school.
Yuki.
I'm the teacher. I'm at fault of doing this as well.
Yuki. Why?
Because it's
Yuki.
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 Yeah, because like most days people will keep on calling me Yuki.
extremely low. Team 2. I'm just like, I'm speechless. Speechless. Intimidated. Of what Eva's been able to do with your team here. It's a very, very tough job. Yeah.
Okay, great.
I went. My first question is, what is ASEAN? Yeah, I spoke to Stan about it. It's actually, he said he initially chose a university to debate. So this is actually taken from a university of politicians. You're just trying to very good. No, but you kind of like
Not even one
So everyone likes it.
There's a lot of carrying having to do with contracts and copyright This is just our best foot forward. Being willing to attempt this bullshit. Let's just skip secondary completely to university. He is the most difficult job. Well, you see, I'm going to use that.
It's so good. Like, you should come to our school. Look, come to our school. It's basically. He's a great teacher. I'm friendly.
Yes, me too.
I like
very chill. That's why I'm very helpful too. I don't mind helping.
And this time he was like, no, he wants everyone. So I was like, okay, so I'm calling everyone else right after he knocked.
Did your senior team also make it to the finals?
You mean an Asta?
I don't think
Same time? Not yet. Oh, no. Kind of,
I remember.
it was such embarrassing to talk about it. Why? Because
I won't push.
I was in debate. I was in that debate.
I'm just
Well, it's no shame if you did your best and when you prepared best. And honestly, we did not, and we didn't make a good team, to be very honest. And now that in the same South team, we kind of have to because we only have a very short time, and we have to work together in front of the rebuts, and we kind of actually just sit together and talk about everything. And I kind of feel like there's an action between us, and then that really helps us in these debates. So I would say it's shameful but helpful at the same time. That's me.
This is also very hard.
Yes, absolutely. Are you going to
not quite ready for that level.
She was like totally freaked out. She didn't know what she was and then in Toronto, she was like crazy. And you actually have to remember the order of standing up and to answer your question and to ask questions.
Yeah, that always confuses me. It goes by so quickly.
Exactly.
You were a little more. The first person has to ask the third speaker, then the third speaker has to ask the second speaker, then the second speaker asks the third speaker, the second speaker has to ask the first speaker again, then the first speaker asks the second speaker.
And then, well, it is, but
So the next number.
yeah, but our chairperson is actually very organized, and that is not good. And then she always reads the name wrong, like A for wrong. I don't know how she made it up. But then we get over the stories at the same time and make the people and chill. But still, it's like and then that's actually a very
But I'm also so the total experience is extreme. I'd say trying to
just because of the English, so we actually.
But I think like the end of the day, it's nice to kind of consider the whole
and that's your like your guys. And you know, your plans made it so will actually help you in all of your learning. You become so more logical. You should be very proud of yourself.
I know it's the same. Was it yours? I barely scraped by, just scraped by. We did it, just had it. Flew by. Flew by, passed once they knew you did it. With that. So I actually spend more time sanctioning
like I can't say it's tough, but they're the most competitive and sharp people.
last few lessons go somewhere.
Yes, when you don't sing top,
same thing for ecology.
they're so shocked at just people react,
Oh, yeah,
how
yeah.
fast they think, and they're super organized.
Oh yeah. No, Hollywood 5.
There's no way to against the people.
We're not like trying to discuss which way should we use. I didn't even have I have.
Happens all the time. The movie, you could watch a movie.
I got you. Never go and watch second imagine the character's name that we yeah, right. A lot of people I don't come out.
The big boys.
This is the big boy lead. What is it about? It's okay, you did fine.
He was just doing his own thing. He was
What happened to you?
Not really. Yeah, choir. Choir. Yeah.
Do you love singing, to be honest? Because singing,
Yeah.
it can be like very terrible. I was in the alto. Yeah. Yes. And to be honest, I was so bad at singing. And there was one time the teacher asked me to come out and sing alone in front of everyone in the choir.
He was like so scared.
And I just told him that. Done?
So, yeah.
Yeah, okay, it's actually done. We can talk about that.
I'm just
It's really, you just get.
Or you want to give the notes there, or
I could give it here. Yeah.
up to you?
Yeah, I'll give it here.
Okay.
Not that. Hey. Hey, need that.
Oh, that's so nice.
That's actually me. Well, if you can tell, I used to have shorter hair.
Are we
I
missing
actually.
somebody?
Yeah, they're on their way back.
And they took a picture of me.
I think they're doing their class photos.
Oh, they're
taking a picture.
Or that's what I saw this
Everyone
time.
else, the previous
Yeah,
four.
I think it's like the
That's why
last
they
one
have a
before
picture of me and then one
Christmas holidays.
with me in the old class.
Oh, wow. Very sweet of it.
Yeah.
Who is leaving? You want to leave? So that they can
I have to go.
Okay.
Tomorrow.
Yeah, just get some.
Remember?
Like,
Alright, yeah, alright. Yeah. I remember. Yeah, I remember.
yeah. I'll now invite the educator to deliver his comment and decision.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for asking me to be the adjudicator for this debate. This motion was used at the Hong Kong Debate Open 2015, which happened last month. It was a university level tournament, though it was also a very doable motion for well, to be frank, it's not really a doable motion for a very short speech length, provided that you have a lot of analyses that needs to be done, and a lot of context setting that also needs to be done. I'm pretty sure that you guys felt the same pressure. So that's why I will try to judge this debate as if from what happened in this debate, but I'll also give some constructive feedback at the end of the session. So I hope that it will help you guys. Right. So first of all, I think the major issue that I have with this debate is I think that there needs to be more solid context that's being set. If you're having international relations debate like this one, it's very important for you to set the real context of this debate or to base this debate on a certain real life event. Now I did see quite a lot of examples coming from both sides, for example the Indonesian haze and also the Australian oil spill and many other examples of environmental disasters. These are okay, but I feel that their role is being downplayed in this debate. I feel that these examples could have been strategically used to a bigger extent to give actual insights, actual realistic insights into how countries interact with each other to examine the dynamics of the relationship between different countries, rather than having to simply assert that, for example, sanctions don't work or sanctions are the best way to do that, because without a real context, it's very hard for me to see which side is talking about the real picture. So I think that it's very important for you to provide a real-life context. So moving on, this debate eventually boiled down to, well, it's more of a flow happening on here rather than distinct clashes. So first of all, the affirmative side came out and talked about, oh, we need sanctions, we need ASEAN to punish the countries because it's the most effective way to do so, and because these environmental disasters are very, very devastating to the international environment. Negative came out and said sanctions don't work, which is a legitimate comeback, but the explanation as provided is a bit not very relevant, in a sense that you talked about sanctions don't work because the ASEAN Charter doesn't say so. First of all, that's not really, in terms of debating, we like to accept the fact that if we examine the idea of sanctions conceptually, whether it can be done or whether it cannot be done, rather than simply resorting to, say, charters don't allow us to do so, laws don't allow us to do so. I think it's more important for you to explain to me why it's important for us to respect these charters, to examine the concept of sanctions, why it will not work in this case, or why it is unethical to impose sanctions in this case. But anyway, I will view that as a challenge back to affirmative side. Affirmative side then came back out and well, you talked a lot about what kinds of sanctions we can do as a counterattack back to the side, right? There are non-economic sanctions, there are economic sanctions, and the entirety of the second speech is about that. I think it's not exactly fitting back into this debate, because it's only a description of sanctions. It's only a description of what we can do, but not actually explaining. You didn't really actually explain how sanctions will push countries to do things, and why in particular is ASEAN the best agent to exert pressure on governments, and why will governments listen to ASEAN. So I think this part should be the focus of your speech, to explain to me how sanctions work, not what sanctions are. I think that's a very important clarification that I want to get it out there. But anyway, let's build back on first speakers, because first speaker briefly mentioned that because countries depend on each other, they have a close relationship. So negative side came out and said they're not mutually dependent on each other, and then this clash was kind of dropped towards the end of the last two speeches. But if we bring it back up, it could actually be a very important point in this debate to explain how sanctions can tie into the dynamics of different countries. How, for example, on affirmative, how sanctions will work because we have economically hindered some countries. We have set up some trade barriers. We have taken away their source of income, especially in Indonesia. In the Indonesian haze incident, for example, you take away their primary source of exports for their rubber, for their palm oil, etc. That kind of explanation is what I'm looking for from your side. And then moving on to second negative, then came out and said, well, ASEAN shouldn't really intervene. You gave me two case studies, and then showing that ASEAN in the past has been actively avoiding to give sanctions because ASEAN Charter says we need to promote dialogue, we should not intervene into countries' sovereignty, etc. Again, this goes back to the problem of an is-ought divide, as in what is happening and what should be done is different. So you can't simply just say that it is not happening in the past, therefore we shouldn't be doing this. I think that is I think that needs to be clarified on the side as well. So yeah, so I think secondly, the case studies don't really tie back to your argument very well. I think that there needs to be a stronger linkage between your case studies and the point that you're trying to make. Okay? And finally, moving to summary. I expected summaries to tell me why your side has won, basically. To identify what your side did well, to identify what the other side didn't do as well. I think on this point, it boils down back to what kinds of burdens each side has. Affirmative says opposition needs to prove alternatives. Not necessarily, but in the context of this debate, it's very important for you to identify that not only it's less about alternatives, it's more about on affirmative, you need to prove to me the benefits of sanctions. On negative, you need to prove to me the harms of sanctions, the actual tangible harms of the sanctions, rather than not simply about violating sovereignty or all that, because sovereignty is a very relative concept, and as you all know, that doesn't really translate into anything that's tangible. So I need both sides to prove to me tangible benefits and tangible harms. But anyway, so for affirmative, even though the other side didn't prove any alternatives, it's still also in affirmative's role to prove to me the benefits of sanctions and why they work best, and why your mechanism is much better than the other side, than whatever they're proposing. Okay? Negative side, I think, well, first of all, I don't think the fire analogy really ties back to this debate, as in the young man is Asean and all that. I don't think, I didn't see a good explanation there. Rather, I'd suggest you to spend that kind of time explaining more on your arguments and show me the dynamics of this debate. Okay? Eventually, towards the end of the summary speaker, there starts to be things that I would have seen to be, like I would have expected to be brought into this debate. I didn't take my expectations into account, but anyway, you said sanctions don't work in the cases of United Nations, in the case of NATO. So this is the kind of thing that I'm trying to expect from this debate, and which leads me nicely to constructive feedback. So what should this debate have been? Well, in my debate, in Hong Kong Debate Open, there was significant discussion not on what sanctions are or what ASEAN is. It's more about whether sanctions will work. This is the major discussion that goes into place. For example, does ASEAN imposing a sanction cause any country to be deterred or to push any country to do anything? Secondly, what is the root of the problem? The root of the problem, for example, in the Indonesian haze, is not about it's not about companies, whatever. It is about the Indonesian government having red tape everywhere and not doing anything to crack down on the illegal practices of companies to burn down forests, and then causing a lot of haze, which caused a lot of economic loss to Singapore because they have to shut down schools, they have to shut down the airport, and that caused a lot of economic loss. Thirdly, and I think this point was briefly brought up in this debate, but I would like to see it extended much further, is I really wanted to see a comparison between sanctions by ASEAN and sanctions imposed by countries themselves, individually. How are they different? And how will ASEAN make a difference? And fourthly, I think this was not brought in this debate, is how does this benefit ASEAN as an organization in Asia? How does this benefit it? How does it increase its bargaining power in various issues in Asia-Pacific region? How does this translate back into the bigger picture? For example, when ASEAN countries are dealing with territorial disputes with China, how does ASEAN being able to impose sanctions translate into that kind of bargaining power of ASEAN? How does it reaffirm its position as an intergovernmental organization in Asia? These can all be discussed. But of course, given 3-minute speeches, that's not really possible. But I'm just suggesting there are a lot of ways to approach this debate. And I think the take-home message from this debate that I really want everyone to know is try to cut back on descriptions of things. Description of how things are, what things are, and more explanation of how things will work, how sanctions will work, how will your model work. And most importantly, try to tie everything to actual tangible benefits, rather than resorting to principles like sovereignty, like respect or dialogue. These things, they're not very tangible, they're not really something that can carry a lot of weight. Okay? So yes, I think that's all for the feedback. So I'll also give the result, yeah?
Yeah.
This was a very close debate. It was, how many marks was the margin? It was, right, it was a 1 mark margin. And I gave this debate to the negative side on the grounds that I think that they're slightly more capable to view the dynamics of this debate. They're able to catch that while affirmative was explaining sanctions and all that, at the very least you're able to identify that sanctions don't necessarily work. And I feel that affirmative didn't give me a very satisfactory response to that, but rather simply reiterating what sanctions are in this debate. So I think on that grounds I gave it to negative, so congratulations. As for best debater, oh, wait. Let me see. I gave best debater to. Sorry, I don't know this one. Yeah, I gave best debater to the third speaker of negative.
Unpack the trophies. So you can present the rank of the winner and then you
I'll now call on Ms. Sidney to present the first runner-up trophy to our affirmative team. Side 1, 2, 3. And now I'll call on our new educator to give the champion trophy to our negative team.
Okay.